Hello and welcome back to OpenNMS 101. My name is Taras Balog and I am one of the maintainers of the OpenNMS project. We've put together this series of videos to provide an online training course to get you up to speed on the wonderfulness that is OpenNMS. I assume by now you've watched the first video in the series, which is the introduction to OpenNMS, and so let's get down to installing it. Now, OpenMS can be installed on RPM-based distros such as Red Hat Enterprise Linux, as well as Debian-based distros such as Ubuntu. They're slightly different, so in this installation we're going to cover the RPM version. We'll have another installation video on the Debian Ubuntu version. Now, there are two versions of OpenMS, Meridian versus Horizon. Both of them require Java. Currently, I believe we require a Java 8. If you're running a lot of devices, the developers will probably tell you to use Oracle's JDK. For most of my installs, I'm fine with OpenJDK. But again, if you run into some performance issues, one of the main things you may want to check is your Oracle version. We're going to install the Oracle JDK version in this exercise. Both have some small amount of C code. Now, back in the late 90s when OpenMS started, Java didn't have an API for pinging. They didn't have an ICMP API. And I don't know about you guys, but the first thing I do in trying to diagnose a network problem is I try to ping the device. So we wrote a piece of code that will actually do our pings for us. It's called JICMP. Also, to integrate with the RD tool for graphing, we use JRD. I'm going to do this install in Horizon. This is freely available downloads for apt and RPM. We're going to use the RPM distro. If you choose our Red Hat Enterprise Linux version, which in features lags Horizon, but Meridian actually is a little more stable, a little more tested, a little easier to support. It's very, very similar, except with Meridian, the repository is password protected. Now, if you go to yum.opennms.org repo files, and I'm just going to do that. So if I go here, you will see there's a ton of these RPMs. One of the cool things we do with OpenNMS is, because we're open source and the mantra is release early and release often, we actually build RPMs for pretty much every branch in our Git repository. We have a bleeding edge repo, which is the root of the branch. For every various branch that has a name, like here's one, Horizon 151. So if I were to go into issues.opennms.org, which is our Jira instance, and look up Horizon 151, that would tell me what this branch is for. Here's all the different issues that go through, and there's a ton of them. Like I said, if you find out one of our developers is working on a cool feature, just go and dig the feature branch. There was one here for Kafka and Minion. We're doing a Carafe integration, a Kafka integration. Here's the Minion Kafka and stuff. It's there. You can go, you can follow right along. It's great. But since most of you, I assume, are pretty new to OpenNMS, what you want to look for is if you scan all the way down to the bottom here, you will see the stable release. Still going. There's a lot of branches. Now, what you need to look for is you want the RPM that corresponds to your operating system, because there is a little piece of C code and they're slightly different depending on what version you're using. Now, I've installed a virtual machine with Red Hat Enterprise, CentOS 7, which is equivalent to Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7. So I'm going to choose this OpenNMS repo stable right here. And I'll right mouse click and I will copy that link. Now, all I need to do here is to go over to my SSH session and then just RPM-UVH and add that repo. And so you can see it's now installed the repo. Now all it did is install one file into the yum repos D directory. Let's just go look at that. So etc yum repos D. Actually, is it in here? There it is. Repos D. And if you look, there is a file now called OpenMS repo stable. And if I look at that, it's going to be it'll tell you all of the stuff where to find the variety of, where to find the OpenMS software. And so now, all I need to do is type yum install OpenMS. Couldn't be easier. Now, I'll probably end up having to cut a little bit of this out, but because it's going to take a little while to download, even on our fairly fast connection to the system. I've installed the minimal CentOS distribution here. I strongly recommend running OpenNMS on its own server, and I strongly recommend using the minimal install. It just makes basic sense. No software is bug-free. The more software you have on your system, the greater chance for bugs, so you might as well minimize the amount of software you install. So as you can see here, we're installing the OpenMS package. This is a wrapper package. It's really tiny. It's only like 6K, but we need Java because we're a Java application. So here's going to install the Java 8 JDK. JICMP and JICP6 are the pieces of C code that we use for doing pings. JICPM6 is for IP version 6, and JICMP is for IP version 4. OpenMS Core is the core package with all the applications in it. Web App Jetty is our web app application. And you see they're quite large. We use tons and tons of libraries which get imported. So you can see this whole thing's going to be about half a gig, a little more than half a gig. And we need a backend database. So we're going to install Postgres, PostgreSQL Libs, and PostgreSQL Server. And so I'm going to sit here and say this is okay. And it's going to go ahead and start downloading this. This is going to take a few seconds, so I'm going to stop recording for a bit, and then we'll go and come back to this when it's done. Okay, now we've got everything downloaded. That didn't take too long. You will see that it's offering to install a key. I would go ahead and say yes. And then there's the CentOS 7 key. This is the first time I've ever done anything on this system, so I'll say yes again. And as you can see, it's now going to go ahead and install the various RPMs. We'll get Postgres installed, we'll get JICMP installed, and we'll get the JDK installed. Now, we're not quite ready once we do this. We have a few other things to do. I find it pretty simple to install OpenNMS, but it can be a little bit difficult, so we actually do have an installation guide. Some of the documentation in OpenNMS is a little hard to find, so I wanted to kind of show you that. If I go to docs.opennms.org, you'll see here's the various OpenNMS projects. As we are making documentation alongside every release. So since the last release of Horizon is 1803, I could click on 1803 here. But documentation is constantly being updated, so I tend to always look at the development version. So I'm going to click on this 20.0 snapshot. And then as you can see, we've got release notes, admin, developers, installation, users, and a few other things. I'm going to click on the HTML guide here for the installation guide. And this will actually bring up a pretty detailed set of documents for install. So if what I'm giving you here isn't good enough, feel free to go and check the database, check the documentation. Now, once everything's installed, before we can do anything, we have to initialize the database. And you use this with this PostgreSQL-setup command. And so if I go back here, I can type PostgreSQL-setup. Did I do this wrong? PostgreSQL-setup initdb. Now what this is going to do is it's going to create the initial database directory. And that happens to live in var lib pgsql. So there's your data directory. Now, if you ever need to get rid of the database, you can stop OpenNMS and delete this data directory and you'll be back at square one. And so now what we're going to end up doing is I'm going to descend into the data directory. Now there's a number of files in here, and the two files we deal with a lot are PostgreSQL.conf and pg_hba.conf. PostgreSQL.conf is a bunch of Postgres settings. For the purposes of this installation, I'm not going to mess with it. I have a slide that I'll show you in a second that talks about where you can go for more information on customizing Postgres. OpenNMS doesn't need PostgreSQL on the same server. You can run it on a different server, and if you do that, it can give you some good performance benefits. Quite frequently, the Postgres transaction logs and OpenNMS RD files compete for disk spindle bandwidth. The disk just is too busy writing, so if you move PostgreSQL to a different server, it can help. But one thing we have to do right now, well, it's just easiest to do, is to edit this pg_hba.conf file. This stands for host-based authentication, and it's how Postgres determines who can connect. Now I'm going to go to the very bottom here, and you will see this line here. It says local all peer host all 127.1/32 ident and host all ::1/128 ident. That is for, there are 3 lines. This one here, the local all, is for socket connections when you're logged into the system. IPv4 connections are limited to localhost, and IPv6 connections are also limited to localhost. That : 1/128 is an IPv6 localhost address. I'm going to change all of these. I'm going to do that. I'm going to change all 3 of these to be trust. Now, you can do this, and you can come set it back and require passwords. I know a lot of systems, if you get audited for security, they don't like having trust. Now, granted, this only limits people who have shell access to the OpenMS server or the Postgres server. And we assume that that's limited. But this just makes the install a lot easier. Once OpenNMS has installed the database, it does use a password. You can set that, and you can go change it in here as well. If you were to install Postgres on a different box, what you would need to do here is set up a connection, probably IPv4, that allows the OpenNMS server to connect. So you would put in here the IP address /32 to limit it to just that IP address to connect here, and I would use a method of password to make sure that it is a password protected connection. So I've set all these things to trust, which means that it won't prompt me for a password if I'm on the shell using a socket connection. It won't trust me for a password if I connect via localhost IPv4 or localhost IPv6. So let me save that. Now, once I do this, I'm ready to start PostgreSQL, so I can use system control, start PostgreSQL. Whoop. I think that'll work. And I hope that's done. PSEF pipe grep post, and we'll see that the postmaster is running. Excellent. So now we have Postgres set up. Now, something else you may want to do is enable Postgres. If we were to restart, this system, we had to reboot it, Postgres would not start automatically, and it is required for OpenNMS. So I'm going to add that line too. So I'll do system control, enable PostgreSQL. So now it'll be turned on. If every time we reboot this, Postgres will start automatically. If you don't want that, don't do this. And if you ever want to turn it off, you can do disable, but it's always good to turn that on. Now, I mentioned there is a wiki entry on tuning PostgreSQL. And what it'll enable you to do is, depending on how much memory and the kind of system you have PostgreSQL running on, you can increase certain parameters to make it perform better. For the exercises in this class, for the OpenMS 101 class, you won't need to do that, and so I'm going to leave that as an exercise to the viewer. Okay. Now, there's 2 things we have to do before we start using OpenMS. The first thing is we have to tell it what Java to use. Now, I'm going to clear this out and go to the opt OpenNMS directory. Almost everything in OpenMS is in the opt OpenMS directory, and if you do a list here, you'll see there's a bin directory, which is where binaries are stored. We have a contribution directory. We have a data directory, which is used for graph, as is deployment. Etsy, we're going to spend forever in the Etsy directory. That's our configuration directory. The web server lives in JD Web Apps. Lib is where all the jar files, the libraries that make up OpenNMS live. Logs is a symlink to var log OpenNMS, and share is a symlink to var OpenNMS. Logs, pretty self-explanatory. Share is where your RD data is stored. And then there's a system directory as well that you don't use very much. In this case, we're going to go into the bin directory. And what we want to do is run a command called run java-s. This says go look for a valid version of Java and set it. And so basically, it's stored, it found out the default Java, user bin Java, is fine. It meets all the criteria we need. So it has stored user bin Java in the java.conf file in Etsy. So now we've installed OpenNMS, we've installed Postgres, we've opened up Postgres to be able to modify it. The next step is to create the database. And also in this bin directory, there is an install command. And I'm going to add 3 flags, dis. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure what they do. I can look them up if I run install without this, but it modifies the database and looks for IPlike and runs a bunch of database commands. This will take a second, so I'll talk over it. So basically what it's doing is it's going through and bringing up tons and tons and tons of information here. It's setting up the database, it's making changes, etc. You can even downgrade using this. We use something called Liquibase to do all of this stuff, and it's very, very powerful. So now we have the database installed. Now I'm going to go back up through my history. I want to go to the very top of this and show you a couple of things. So if we go up to the top, you'll see here it's checking for libjrd. So the first thing it checks for is libjicmp. We have to have libjicmp in order to do pings. Libjrd is optional. Libjrd allows us to use RDTool instead of the built-in JRobin. JRobin is a Java port of RDTool. And there was a time where JRobin was, it performed better than RDTool. It was written in Java, it was multi-threaded, etc. Sasha Markovic, the guy who invented JRobin, ended up leaving the project, and he donated JRobin to us. We were one of the major users of JRobin. And we, quite frankly, have not maintained it. I mean, we've made changes that make it work better with OpenNMS. But Toby Edeker, who maintains RDTool, has done a lot of amazing stuff. So at this point in time, it's actually better to use RDTool. So what we are going to do now is I want to install JRRD. We're going to install JRRD2. JRRD2 is a multi-threaded version of our RD library. So it works really, really well. So if I do a yum install JRRD2, it'll go in, and note that it requires RDTool, quite naturally, and RDTool requires a bunch of these other libraries. So there's RDTool right there. So we're going to go ahead and install these packages. So this will install RDTool. We've set Java, we've opened up the database, we've set Java, and we've installed the OpenNMS database. Now we're going to install RDTool. There's one other step we have to do in order to turn RDTool on. And that is we have to go into the RDTool configuration file and set it to use RDTool versus JRobin. Now, I'd mentioned before that in OpenNMS, in the opt OpenNMS directory, there were these subdirectories: bin, contrib, data, deploy, etc. We spend a lot of time in etc. And as you can see, there's tons of files in here, and we're going to touch on almost every one of them. But right now, I want to edit this RD configuration properties. So let me show you that, because it kind of went kind of fast. It's called rrd-configuration.properties. It's an opt OpenNMS Etsy. And if you notice, right here at the top, it says, to switch to the JNI implementation, uncomment the following lines. this is what we want to do. So these 3 lines here, OpenNMS, strategy class, OpenMS interface jar, this will switch it. These 3 lines will switch OpenNMS to use RDTool. So you want to use RDTool because it performs better, but you have to make this decision now. While JRobin is fine, and with many cases it works fine, JRobin files are not binary compatible with RDTool files, so you can't switch them. And so what we're going to end up doing is if you start collecting data under JRobin and then decide later you want to use RDTool, you have to it's possible to export and import your data, but it's difficult. So I strongly recommend you use RDTool and you start with RDTool. So we're going to save that right there. Now there's one other thing I want to install. IPlike. So IPlike is a tool we wrote to enable you to do to manage IP addresses. IP addresses are weird. I mean, it's a series of numbers that goes from 0 to 254, and there's 4 groupings of them, 4 octets. And I might want to say, okay, show me everything on the 10.10.1 network. Well, with IPlike, I can say, show me where the IP address is IPlike 10.10.1.star. Now, there is a version of IPlike. It's scrolled off my my screen. We have written a version of IPlike using Postgres, using PostgreSQL's own scripting language. It works. It's fine. It's just not as efficient. And we assume you're looking at OpenNMS because you're looking for scalability. So let's install IPlike. Now, we can't install IPlike until the database is installed, and that's why it's not installed by default. Otherwise, people forget to install it, etc. So now that we've run the install.dis command, we're actually in a position to install IPlike. So I'll do yum install IPlike. Say yes. So it'll go ahead and install, and it'll install it into the OpenNMS database. Now you can install it without OpenNMS being there, but then you have to run a command to manually add it to the database. Now I'm going to go back into the bin directory here, and I'm going to run the installer a second time. One of the nifty things about OpenMS is you can run the installer as many times as you want, and it won't cause any problems. But what I want to show you is this bit right here. This is the piece I was searching for in my previous setup, checking to see if IPlike is usable. Yes. So this lets me know that I have successfully installed IPlike, and if I go up here, you will see that I have successfully installed JRD2. So learning is all based upon repetition, so let's repeat what we did. The first thing we did was we installed a repository that allowed us to find OpenNMS using yum. Then we did a yum install OpenNMS, which installed all the necessary dependencies. I'm old enough to remember when dependency hell was a real thing, but bam, it got everything we needed to install OpenNMS. Then we used run java-s to set the Java version. We ran install.dis, back up. We then went and created the Postgres database. So once we had Postgres installed, we initialized the database, opened up the pghba.conf file to trust localhost connections. Then we ran run java-s to set the Java version, and then install.dis to install the database. Then we installed JRD2. We edited rd-configuration.properties to enable OpenMS to use RDTool, and then we installed IPlike, and we verified that all that was working. So now it's time to start OpenNMS. So we'll use the system control thing as well. Again, I recommend using enable if you want to automatically start OpenNMS on a reboot. If you're still playing with this or you're diagnosing problems, you may not want to do that. But what I'm going to do is go here, and I'll do system control, enable OpenNMS, and then system control, start OpenNMS. And assuming we did everything well, OpenNMS should start. Now, I'm not sure with CentOS 7, I believe I will not be able to connect to the server. So I'm going to go over to my server here. Now, if you're running this on a system with a graphical user interface, you can just connect to localhost. But I'm not. I'm running this in a VM with no graphical front end whatsoever. As I said, I like to do a minimal install. So if I check, I can use IP-adder to show my IP address. And as you can see, it's 172.20.1.124. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my web server here, and I'm going to try to go to 172.20.1.124, port 8980, because that's the port that OpenMS runs on. And now, as you can see, it says unable to connect. And the reason is the CentOS firewall blocks connections. So going back to our slides, you can see we have this firewall command, zone public, add port, and make it permanent. So let me see if I can memorize that. So I don't think I can cut and paste. So do firewall command. What was the next thing? Zone public. So dash dash zone equals public. I think it was dash dash port equals 8980/TCP and dash dash permanent. Make sure I spelled that right. I'm a cutty pasty kind of guy, so if I had this handy, I'd probably do that. Add port, sorry. So let's do an add dash port. Success! Yay, that worked. And then we need to reload it. So firewall command dash reload. And now, if we did everything right, we should be able to access the OpenNMS web user interface. There we go. Let's make that a little bigger so everyone can see. So now we're on OpenNMS. The username is admin and the password is admin. It's quite tricky. And I can log in and I can say, hey, there is OpenNMS. Now the first time you log in, it's going to ask you whether or not you want to opt in to sending data to OpenNMS. We have a website called stats.opennms.org, which reports all of the information that we get from the various installs. So right now, we've just introduced this. We have 1,167 people in the last 7 days have installed OpenNMS. And basically, what this helps us do is, A, we don't know who uses OpenNMS. And we'd like to know. So we'd like to know what versions they're running. As you can see here are the different versions that we have running. And we have the operating systems that they're running on. So we have that there. We also have the ability to get what devices you're using. So if I go back to the web console, if I say show what's being sent, right now we have nothing. But it will show us the total number of alarms, total number of events, how many interfaces, monitored services, etc. You can see exactly what we're asking for. This connects via an SSL connection to stats and send us this information. So I'm going to hit opt in for here. Now, if you ever want to change that, you can go under this admin menu, configure OpenNMS, and go to the very bottom, and you'll see it says data choices. And if I collect on that, that'll bring you back to that screen. So I'm going to leave it at there. So go ahead, install OpenNMS, and go find the next video, which will talk to you about navigating the web UI and things like that. And I hope you found this useful. See you next time.